Hi, welcome to One Degree Shifts. I'm your host, Pascal Tremblay. I'm the co founder of Nectar, and I'm joined by my friend and brother, Troy Valencia. Hi, Troy.
Hey, brother, man, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I can't complain, man. It's a beautiful day out here. I'm in the States right now, but looking forward to getting back to Costa Rica soon.
Costa Rica. Yes, so many people I know go there to work and live, and then they cross over to Bali, where I'm staying. So there's always a Costa Rica field around me somehow. And today I'm very excited to talk to you because we're talking about Iboga, which is a very powerful plant medicine. We're going to be demystifying it a little bit. We're going to be talking about the Bwiti tradition. We're going to be talking about conservation. We're going to be talking about safety and integration. And I'm particularly excited about this conversation because Iboga is one of the few medicines I haven't sat with. And I've heard stories from I was purging for 24 hours to I healed MS and autoimmune disease healing and cancer is being reverted and all sorts of different miraculous benefits from it. So I've heard the whole spectrum of really challenging to like just massive healing. And I'd love for people to know a little bit more about you. Like, what's your background and what you're up to in the world these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born, raised San Diego, California. I grew up in the foster system. Basketball was my escape out. I played college basketball in Kansas City. There, I double majored in biology, chemistry, then went and got a master's in analytical chemistry. Worked as a chemist for about 10 and a half years. Had my first plant medicine experience with Aya, which changed my life. Afterwards, I received an invitation to come to Iboga, sat with that plant, found out through the ceremony that my father, who I'd never met, had Gabonese lineage. I went home and took a DNA test, which confirmed that. So I sold all my stuff, my house, left my partner, and moved to Costa Rica. There, I got a second master's in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies. And now I'm in a clinical doctorate for clinical psychology, my last year right now. And I'm doing my dissertation on specifically the efficacy of Iboga for mental health.
That's beautiful. And what I like about your background is that you're merging modern science with traditional knowledge, and I find that overlapping very exciting, and especially with Iboga, who's been around for centuries, and eventually got is sort of in the Western world in some ways. I was reading just before the call that in France, some cyclists were using it for performance enhancing benefits in the early 20th century, and I had no idea about that. And of course, in 1967, it got banned in the U.S. as a Schedule One substance, and the research is sort of resurging now, I think, and around the potential benefits from it. And I love that you're able to bridge these two worlds in this conversation today. And I'd love to hear more about, to begin, how you got linked to the Bwiti tradition, and maybe explain for people who don't know what the Bwiti tradition is, the origins, and how it frames healing and transformation, and how important Iboga is for their culture.
Yeah, my introduction to the Bwiti, as I said, came in my first ceremony with Iboga. I had a visionary experience where I was on a village and speaking with a few of the people there. And one of them told me that this is my home. And so when I did go home and do the genetics test, as I said, I never met my biological father. It confirmed that my direct genetic lineage was right from Gabon, Africa. So yeah, once I started working with Iboga, the first thing on my list was to go out there and take place in an initiatory ceremony. I've been initiated twice into the Bwiti now in two different traditions. The first was a mix between Dasumba Fang. A way to sort of understand the different traditions, you could say, is imagine a tree. The roots of the tree are the Dasumba tradition. You could think of that sort of as where it starts. The trunk of that tree is the Masoko, and then the various branches of the tree sort of form the other traditions you're seeing nowadays, one of which is the Fang, which has Christian influence. And so my first initiation was with a mix between the Dasumba and the Fang, and my recent one was a Masoko initiation.
And so much of and it's the background in which you came into the medicine is pretty powerful, that you learn about your lineage there. And based on what I've read, so much of the frame of healing that the Bwiti tradition has with Iboga is around lineage transmission and around honoring ancestors and the land. And can you share a little bit more about the basic pillars of that tradition?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess the first thing I just want to start with is that, the only way to really understand what the Bwiti is to sit in ceremony yourself. Words really can't articulate or capture the beauty and depth of the tradition. There's a moment where I'll tell you you're in the ceremony and there's shakers and there's people with the torches, which are called mopetos. They know that is the first light of man. And there's just this collective heartbeat that's happening in there. And you feel like there's just one person, one living being in the space. And what I would say is that is really what the Bwiti is. And to know that you have to participate in that yourself and feel it. But to sort of articulate it, the Bwiti is a spiritual discipline, you could call it. It's a way of life. And to be Bwiti is to be a student of life itself. And so, as I said, there's many different branches. There's women's traditions all over the place there. But at the core of it, it's to be a student of life. Their tradition is filled with meaning and purpose. I mean, even as Westerners come to these villages, the way that they name the Westerners tells a story in itself. So the first Westerner will have a name sort of like an example is in the village I'm initiated to, the first Westerner there was his Kombo, which is your spiritual name. It means Ibando, it's new beginnings. And then the next one will have a name that sort of tees off on that. And so just as the Westerners come, they're telling a story. The ceremonies are the same way. Everything is storytelling. It's an oral tradition, of course, but through dance, through movement, and then just through the heart. It's a really beautiful practice. The people there are dedicated. I mean, the ceremonies are 16, 18, 24 hours sometimes. And I mean, you're talking about people who are, this is their life and they're living for that. And it's just really, really beautiful thing that you have to go see for yourself in person one day.
Absolutely. I definitely feel the call to experience that. And what does that mean for your life in the modern world? How do you live a Bwiti traditional life or spiritual practice in your daily life?
One thing I can tell you is that if there's one thing I've taken away from my initiatory experiences is that, excuse me, I've actually always been Bwiti because Bwiti is something that happens in the privacy of your own heart. And if there's one thing I can tell you about them is that, or about my life after being initiated, is that it taught me in probably the most fundamental and rudimentary way possible that every single occurrence in this world is an opportunity for study and everything has meaning, right? There's a folk tale there that if a fly lands in your eye, it's a sign from the spiritual realm that you're going the wrong direction in life, right? And so everything has meaning. And so coming back to this world and being able to apply that, you still have life events, of course, things happen, but you understand that there's a depth and meaning to all of that. And it's a really beautiful evolution of awareness. It's almost like at first, sort of life happens to you, and you have sort of this victim mentality. And after I was initiated, I started to see that life really is happening for me. And it's sort of like a gift all of a sudden. And then with the next initiation, I started to see that life is actually happening with me. I'm a co-creator in this process. And I think the next evolution is to understand that life happens as us. In other words, a unity sort of consciousness, which is what I was referring to in the temple when everyone's sort of shaking the shakers and singing. You can't really distinguish one person from another. It's one collective heartbeat. And so the essence of the temple has come back with me and it's sort of guiding the evolution of my life now.
That's amazing. And it really sounds like medicine for our times of disconnection, right? And
Yeah.
not just to ourselves, but our lineages and the planet itself. And the invitation, from what I'm hearing, sounds to be something that a lot of people would benefit and would love to hear and really integrate into their daily life, which is this dance with the divine and the connection to everything and the participation in the dance as well as humans and our role to play in the ecosystem and the web of life. And what I've heard is that it has a very earthy, it's a root. It has a very earthy Pachamama, Mother Earth connection. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, like during your ceremonies and this feeling of uniting with the rest of the group there. How much of that was reconnection to the earth itself, and how did that feel for you?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say is, if you said it best, it's a root. And if you think about the essence of a root And what it does, it naturally grows down into the darkest places, and that's where it finds its sustenance. That's where it sort of settles. And sort of Iboga in the same way finds itself into the deepest, darkest parts of your mind, really the deepest unconscious aspects of you who, you don't really know about or you can't really see. But the thing about that plan is where it extends to and navigates to, you can now become a witness of. And so it unveils parts of your psyche in layers and depths that it's almost like there's a quote from the Upanishads, and they talk about how there's waking reality and dream sleep, and they say that in waking reality we're a point of perception, and then we fall asleep at night, and again we become a point of perception inside of the dream world this time, and then there's this third layer where we call dreamless sleep, right? Where it's sort of like there's nothing there. It's just kind of things sort of just skip by. The best way for me to explain Iboga in that sense and what it does is it wakes you up in dreamless sleep. And according to the Upanishads, if you can wake up in dreamless sleep, they say you'll become who you truly are, free from the conditionings of the mind and free from the limitations of the body. And that's really what it feels like out there. It's like you're waking up in a realm that's encompassing all the other realms. And so you have this vision or this perspective of everything, especially your life, in a way that is just, it's unparalleled to any plant I've ever sat with. And, we work with you guys for our integration support, and you guys are a core of what we do. But my wife and I founded Root and Wisdom. We have our Iboga retreat in Costa Rica. And what we see with guest after guest is sort of the same experience. It's waking them up in a state where they're able to view all the layers of themselves. And there's
In a
something really,
non-judgmental way, right? Like in a sort of witness way, like you said. And that's what I've heard from other people
yeah,
as well, is that you just observe and maybe images will pass through of your life or things that you need to see and maybe reflect on. But I never heard that it has this judgment like quality. It doesn't hit you on the head. It's more of like a message in some way.
yeah, and there's something to that because there'll be judgment, but the judgment happens in the mind. And when you're with Iboga, you're pulled back from that. There's a song by Ram Dass. It's called like "Sitting Around the Fire" or something. But he starts the song by saying, "Beyond all polarities, I am. Let the judgments and opinions of the mind be the judgments and opinions of the mind, and you exist beyond that." And that's exactly what it does. It makes you that witness of the mind. And that comes out with you when you exit the ceremony. And that's the real gift of Iboga.
Sort of opens up a new vista into which you can relate to life and yourself in a more compassionate way, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and you start to understand the teachings of people like Eckhart Tolle and Ram Dass and some of these Babas who have taught about, being beyond the mind, being beyond the body. You start to understand that in an experiential way, not just intellectually. And there's a real beauty in that.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like Iboga is more of a not so much a tool as much as a living culture and ecosystem and way of life, really.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And Iboga and the Bwiti are, you can't separate the two. Is just a reality between it. Yeah, Iboga is the Bwiti and the Bwiti is Iboga. They're one and the same. They're interchangeable. And so to work with Iboga is to become Bwiti in its own way. Now, when you go to Africa, there's an initiation that happens into the Bwiti that you will not find anywhere else in the world. That's a different depth. But what we do in Costa Rica is we work with it in a much more, you can sort of call it a psychospiritual or therapeutic way, slightly lower doses, um, and just giving people a lot of that clarity and visionary state you spoke about, but also with the groundedness that's an aspect of Iboga.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit about the bridging between the traditional and the Western world, and you operate from a lineage connection to the Bwiti tradition. You've been initiated. You serve medicine from that knowledge and wisdom and connection to the land there. How do you feel about sort of the expansion of Iboga these days? And I know there's issues with over harvesting and poaching. I think it's important to talk about honoring the traditional and also the sustainability, but also the reciprocity aspect of this work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Blessings of the Forest is an NGO that has sort of championed right now how to create reciprocity in its truest form. And so they've created a system in order to which Iboga can be taken from a village and brought to you. It's the Nagoya Protocol, with full traceability, making sure nothing's poached, making sure the plant was harvested correctly. There's a specific way to harvest Iboga where you don't damage the plant. What happens with a lot of poachers is they just cut down the whole tree, which is obviously a big problem. In the West, a majority of the people interchange Iboga and Ibogaine. And one thing a lot of people don't understand is that the majority of Ibogaine at clinics is not coming from Iboga. It's actually coming from a plant called Volcanga africana. The reason is because the Volcanga grows faster and it has a higher percent of Ibogaine available to it. So you can get more higher extraction efficiency. And so, yeah, what we've done, my wife and I, is we started a nonprofit called Sacred Roots Foundation, which we run in parallel with our retreat, Root and Wisdom. And so, in the last 6 years of doing this, my wife and I haven't taken a single dollar from Iboga. Obviously, the business has to support itself, the quote unquote business. Our staff will get paid, but my wife and I don't take any pay from it. And that's our commitment back. All of our funds that we would receive go to our nonprofit, and then we do restoration projects back in Gabon. We've done one for beekeeping, teaching indigenous people, the Bwiti, the Babongo people, excuse me, how to cultivate honey. We've done a dental work project called Smile Gabon to help kids find dental work. And right now we're running a big cultural preservation project because a lot of the villages are being cannibalized by the cities. And what happens is because it's an oral tradition, the boys who are getting passed down this wisdom are starting to go into the city and get caught into the temptations of that life. And they're not coming back to their cultural ways. And so the Bwiti is sort of being cannibalized from the plant aspect and destroyed that way. And it's also being taken over from the inside out from the cities. And so our big push right now is raising funds to help them buy, our specific village, buy some land in the jungle, to rebuild a traditional village, which is further away from the cities. And so, if anyone's listening and want to support, our website's called Sacred Roots Foundation, and you will be able to see the specific fund right on there.
Beautiful, and we'll put the link in the notes for sure. And yeah, thank you so much for approaching the work that way. I actually didn't know that about you and Jwali, and it's beautiful. Thank you
Yeah.
for doing that. And I think
Y-
that's a really good model to move forward with in the medicine space because
Yeah.
there is expansion and healing, but also like what's underneath that. It's I think it's important to look under and look back, and also support all the elements of the roots ecosystem, including the traditional villages and the people who are been holding this work for centuries. And we're so grateful for them to be doing that, but also we need to pay it back in meaningful ways, right? And for people
Yeah.
who want to interface with this medicine, what are some quick tips you have for finding the right places to work with the medicine in a way that's not extractive and honors the traditional?
Yeah. I guess the first thing to distinguish, is what is best for you. Is it Ibogaine or Iboga, right? If you're someone dealing with substance problems and you don't think you can get yourself clean for about 14 to 21 days, I would definitely go to an Ibogaine clinic and do that treatment plan. And if you're looking for it more for sort of spiritual exploration, to sort of process things like traumas that might not be resolved, or maybe just for curiosity, what I would strongly suggest is, finding an Iboga provider who has sort of a therapeutic approach built around it. One thing I can tell you is that you cannot duplicate the Bwiti. It's not going to happen unless you're in Gabon. And so, one of the things I really suggest people is if you're going to work with Iboga, find people who have a therapeutic background who are holding it because it is such a mental medicine. And so, yeah, like I talked about with you before, there's a lot of questions, you can ask people. But yeah, one of the main ones I would look for is trying to understand is, where are they getting their Iboga from? Right? They should be very clear about that. If they say, oh, I have a guy, ask them about the Nicoya protocol, right? Another important question to ask is ask them to tell you about, how they give back. And if they say, they're donating money back, ask them how, and really be curious about that, because a lot of people will tell you they're giving back, but they don't have a way in which that's occurring. Another one that's probably the most important, I would say, is ask them how are they actually serving Iboga, in which form. people use different forms. Some people use extracts. They call it TA, total alkaloid extract. And they're not the same. And actually, TA is much more dangerous than Iboga, it has much more cardiotoxicity. And so some of those are some pretty core questions to ask about them. You can also ask what village they were initiated at, how long they've been doing this, things of that nature are really core questions you want to start with.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Let's dive into the science. And I know you love science because you were a chemist for 10 years and you have many degrees. I'd love for you to share a little bit and please nerd out and just share whatever excites you the most about the science. And please go ahead. I'm just waiting to
Yeah.
hear the exciting stuff.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that um, in terms of Iboga research, there isn't a lot of that. Like I said, for my dissertation, I don't know many, I actually haven't found any Iboga research out there. I've only found Ibogaine research. And so, yeah, mine's a mixed method analysis that we're doing for research on Iboga. But what's really fascinating about Iboga is that there's a whole slurry of other alkaloids in there, right? Alkaloids are nitrogen containing compounds. An example is serotonin or caffeine. These are very common things we all know about. Ibogaine is just one of the many alkaloids in Iboga. And it's the most highest naturally occurring, which shows up around 5 to 7% inside of the tabernanthe root bark. And so most of the research out there is on Ibogaine. And some of the cool studies you'll find, one, for example, is about the GDNF proteins. They're called glial cell-lined derived neurotropic factors. When you're between the ages of 0 and 3, you have the highest amount of GDNF proteins you're ever going to have. And that makes sense because your brain is developing. You're learning at an all-time rate. And after the age of 3, this number starts to taper off for the rest of your life. And this includes, this is part of the reason why people later in life have sort of these neurodegenerative disorders. And so after you take Iboga and Ibogaine, you're going to get an all-time high spike in GDNF proteins. This is a scientific fact. And this is accounting weight for weight. And so what's really happening with these GDNF proteins is your brain is going to a state of hyper repair. Another interesting fact about Iboga Ibogaine that it does for your brain is it stimulates the production of the myelination around your neurons. So if you've ever seen the anatomy of a neuron, there's the head, the body, and the dendrites at the end, the tail. Well, the way your neurons communicate is a chemical impulse turns into a electrical impulse and it travels down the body. The myelination is the insulation that allows that electrical impulse to stand, to stay, and to move. Without that myelination, it dissipates. And actually, that's what MS is. MS is when the myelination breaks down through autoimmune reasons. Well, Iboga Ibogaine has been known to repair the myelination around your neurons. It's why in our retreats, we always feed foods with good cholesterol to our guests. Lots of eggs, lots of avocados, salmons, things with omega-3 fatty acids are great dietary stuff to have while working with Iboga. And in fact, there's a study done where they had a gentleman who had these large lesions in his brain in the parietal lobe. And what they did is they treated him with just one dose of Ibogaine, 1,200 milligram dose, and the lesions decreased in size by 71%. And just think about that.
Yeah, it's pretty
There's a Stanford,
miraculous.
Stanford study done, same thing. You find that the average age of the people who took Ibogaine before and after the study decreased by 1.37 years of the brain. The brain
Mm,
got younger.
wow.
And as you know, it works for PTSD, depression, anxiety. But the reason I started off with saying the difference between Iboga and Ibogaine is because Iboga has other alkaloids in it. And the research that we're driving right now is putting in our time and effort into studying these other alkaloids. I have a hypothesis that Ibogaine actually isn't the most beneficial alkaloid inside of the plant. It might be the most researched, but I have a strong suspicion that there's other alkaloids inside of there that actually are more therapeutic, have more therapeutic potential in them. That's just some of the stories I can tell you about the research around it. But yeah, we could go on and on and on about this one for days. And every month on our community call, I go into the science behind it. And another one I'll share with you, if you'd like to hear this one, you spoke about cancer at the start of the call when we were chatting. Iboga actually Ibogaine actually serves as an anti-cancerous properties. And the reason why is because cancer cells have to proliferate. That's what they do. They grow and grow and grow. Anything that's growing requires nutrients and sustenance. And so the way cancer cells do that is through a receptor that they have called the sigma receptor. The sigma receptor is responsible for allowing calcium to enter and exit the cell. And calcium for the cancer cell is one of the most important minerals it's going to have. Well, what happens is ibogaine binds to the sigma receptors, and so it blocks the entry of calcium into the cell. The cancer cell is still trying to grow, but it's not getting the calcium. And so what happens is it enters something called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. And so we had a gentleman come to our retreat who had stage 4 cancer in his prostate, a terminal illness, and did 4 ceremonies with us in a row, actually, working with Iboga, and went home and his tumor shrunk by almost 80%. And then he came back a few more times. He's now living cancer-free. And if you see, we have a property in the Caribbean. The reason we got that property is this was his man's thank you to us. Yeah, another very interesting thing with Iboga is that Ibogaine is that it's almost a direct cure for Parkinson's disease. One of the reasons
Mm,
why Parkinson's disease happens is that the dopamine producing neurons degenerate and die. And without dopamine, we can't control our body. That's why you see them with the shakes. There's a lot of stuff that comes with it. But what's interesting is one of the ways and one of the reasons these neurons die is there's a protein in your dopamine tract called an alpha-synuclein protein. Alpha-synuclein has a lot of responsibilities, but what's important to know is that it has to fold a certain way in order for it to be removed from the dopamine producing area where those neurons are. If it folds incorrectly, it can be removed and it starts to build up. And as it builds up, it creates a toxic environment around the dopamine producing neurons, which kills them, which then leads to the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. One of the interesting studies done is they found is that ibogaine is a pharmacological chaperone for the alpha-synuclein protein. In other words, it folds it correctly. Just imagine that. You're literally talking about a cure for the reason why Parkinson is happening in a lot of cases. We had a guy come to our retreat as an Olympic rower, literally in the Beijing Olympics, diagnosed with Parkinson's. And if you see him now, he still has slight tremors, but a lot of the symptoms that were really debilitating his life have completely vanished. He's still microdosing with Iboga, of course. But these are just some of the potentials it has. And again, this research is just with ibogaine. Imagine
mm.
if we start uncovering the truths about the noribogaine or the ibogainamine and these other secondary metabolites that are inside of there that haven't been investigated yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
there's a lot
really
of
reminds
potential
me
there.
of yeah, it reminds me of Cambo, which is also under studied in all the alkaloids in that medicine as well, and the miracles that I've heard practitioners share with me around, the medical benefits. We're just scratching the surface basically, and I'm so excited for the potential of healing that these medicines can bring. And for those who don't know, just to specify, iboga is the whole root, right? And ibogaine is the alkaloid extract, right? It's just one part of it, just to clarify for people out there.
Yeah, the way I frame it is Iboga is the rainbow and ibogaine is the color red. Now the color red, yeah, the color red has its purpose, but when people ask which one should I work with, like I said before, you might have a need for the color red. But if I were to ask you to paint a picture, would you use just one color or would you use the entire palette of colors available to you?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there's a depth and a beauty that comes with Iboga. And in Africa, they actually say that Ibogaine is Iboga without the soul. And so it's important just to understand that.
Yeah. How would you differentiate the experience of working with ibogaine, iboga, and what are the different maybe applications or settings that they're found in, and how could people navigate those choices?
Yeah, I mean, Ibogaine is really used more in a medical setting. I mean, your container is going to be a medical environment. You're going to be hooked up to machines. I'm sure you heard of the cardiotoxicity with Ibogaine, the heart effects. There's actually a thing about that Iboga gets a bad rap for that. So the reason why there's cardiotoxicity is that Ibogaine binds to a receptor in your heart called an HERG channel. And what actually happens is the reason your heart is able to beat is potassium is flowing in and out of your heart through this channel. When potassium moves from the inside out, the polarity flips. And when it goes back in, the polarity flips back. That's your heartbeat. And the consistency of that heartbeat is called your Q to T interval. And so what's interesting about that is when you go to a clinic, you have to be, if you're working with Ibogaine, you have to be under medical monitoring because you're getting a tremendous amount of Ibogaine pumped through your system. Iboga is only 5% Ibogaine. So in order to ingest enough Iboga, to have enough Ibogaine or noribogaine to actually affect your heart, you would have to eat like a kilogram of Iboga. And so the settings are completely different for very, very important reasons, right? We still have doctors at our retreat. We still have a nurse there. But ours is in the jungle. There's massage and we use Ayurvedic practices like Shirodhara. We have, Reiki and sound healing and there's yoga. And you swim in the river and we take you to the river and do spiritual showers. At the clinics, you're not getting that. It's a very, very different sort of set and setting. And if you've read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, he sort of goes into that, how important that is. And so, yeah, it's two different worlds that sort of get mixed up with each other and kind of people talk about one as if they're together, but they're very, very different things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What can go wrong? I mean, we know about the heart issues, and for those who don't know, there can be some difficulties with heart, challenges with iboga, but mostly ibogaine, right? Ibogaine, right? So a
Or
lot of
TA.
retreats and or TA and clinics have oftentimes doctors on staff, and I think it's a very basic part of the safety part of this. But what else can go wrong, and who is not the right fit for this medicine?
Yeah, so I guess what could go wrong if someone's coming in and they have substances in their system and they're working with Ibogaine or Iboga, there is a real threat there. Not as much about the cardiotoxicity, more so about seizures. That's one of the symptoms that can happen there. What could go wrong if you're served too much Iboga? That's probably the most dangerous aspect of it is people who are given too much and a lot in the space, there is a sort of a wild, wild west sort of mentality a lot of the times. And so if you is consume too much Iboga, what happens is you're stimulated for multiple days. In other words, you don't sleep. And one of the biggest threats to people's health and well-being is a lack of sleep. And so one of the biggest risks you're going to find is the threat of psychosis, which happens through a lack of sleep, actually. But there are ways to navigate around that. For example, we serve much less, but what we do is we grind up the iboga into a very, very fine powder. And the reason that's important is because if you're ever in a chemistry lab, you'll learn that surface area is everything. If you grind it into a powder, you're increasing the surface area tremendously. And so 3 grams of a grind powder and 3 grams of just ground up bark that's still chunky are completely different things. And so not only do you absorb more because of higher surface area, but it travels through your system faster. And so there are ways to mitigate the main risks, but the real two ones are people who have psychotic disorders. If you have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, you probably should not work with Iboga or Ibogaine, in my humble opinion. There's a sensitivity in a way that Iboga works with the mind that, you have to have somewhat of a presence about you. If you're someone who has a weak psyche and very scattered, you have to be very careful with something like Iboga. And if you are working with it, you need to make sure that the people understand that and they're giving you lighter doses.
Mhm. Is it fairly receptive to your intentions? Iboga, I know ayahuasca can kind of have its own mind sometimes. It's like what you need, not what you want. But with Iboga, is it pretty malleable? Is it pretty workable, or is it pretty opinionated?
The way I describe it is ayahuasca is like sitting shotgun in a stunt car while there's a stunt driver doing all sorts of things, and you're kind of just holding on and like you might tell him like, "Hey, let's slow down," but he or she probably won't listen.
That's
E-
hilarious. That's a great analogy.
Iboga is like being the stunt driver yourself. And so you have control of the steering wheel, and the car also has its own momentum and aspects to it that are going to take you places. But there is a lot more control with Iboga. It's why a lot more people, when they have it, they really resonate with it because you can navigate the space really well. And what we actually tell people is something that I learned studying the work of a man named C. Michael Smith. He was a Jungian analyst from back in the day. And then he got a PhD in medical anthropology. And he wrote a book called Jung and Shamanism in Dialogue. Really, really beautiful book where he compared the work of Carl Jung to different shamanic healing traditions. But one of the things that he said was very unanimous, and I saw this in the Bwiti as well, is that intention is actually the vessel in which the shaman uses to navigate the spiritual realm. And in the West, we have an intention as like what we're going to go do with this plant. And so what we tell people, if they're comfortable with this, of course, is not to set an intention until you get in the medicine, because you have a different sort of framework and awareness to you. And so what we actually have people is we use your intention inside the ceremony and build it there, and that will actually help you navigate the medicine more. If you try to take your intention from the outside in, good luck. But if you do it from the inside out, you have a lot more control.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an important reframe for the experience itself. And um, so it sounds like, aside from some maybe severe psychological issues, um, not having a proper medical team, and maybe not being in the right frame of mind to engage with the medicine in a good way, like it's a fairly widespread beneficial experience for the majority of people. Is there any other cases where you would say like maybe don't use Iboga?
Yeah, I mean, if you're someone who has a chaotic home environment, and just where you live, your environment you're coming back to isn't safe, I would tell you not to work with Iboga because the neuroplasticity with Iboga is effective on a level like no other plant. And when you put together the GDNF factor, the BDNF, the myelination, everything it's doing from the neuroplasticity standpoint, which I'm doing a presentation on in a week for our community call, um, you're highly malleable. And so there's a double-edged sword with Iboga because the neuroplasticity is objective, right? You can go home into a soft environment and have space for yourself and really use the neuroplasticity to change you in really beneficial ways. And you can go home into an environment that's chaotic and violent and unsafe, and it's going to further ingrain your fear. And so that's actually why you, in the Iboga space, if you're someone serving it, one of the biggest risks that come to people who serve it is that you're constantly consuming it. And so you're constantly producing these GDNF proteins, which your brain is always in a very malleable state. And so if you're doing things out of alignment, it's going to ingrain those things so deep into who you are, it's almost impossible to reverse that. And we've seen that firsthand. It's actually why we started. That's why we don't do the bunny thing. It's why we started our Sacred Roots Foundation. It's why we have such a soft and gentle approach, because we saw the potential of how dangerous it can be to be an Iboga provider. And so there's things,
Mm.
safeguards we put in place for our own lives, our own sake, which happen to obviously translate to reciprocity. But yeah, I mean that there's a real risk to that. If you're coming home and you don't have a safe environment, do not touch Iboga at all.
Mm. Yeah, thanks so much for mentioning that. And also the provider aspect, which is why vetting your provider is so important. And you can speak to the cows come home about the healing benefits of these medicines, but ultimately the container you're in is going to influence you, and the container you go back into, like you said, also is going to influence you. So it's really a healing journey that starts when you're deciding to take medicine. And so I think every step should be taken with a lot of intention and thought to safety and transformation. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that. A lot of people say, medicines are like 10 years of therapy in one sitting, and I'm just going to go to the jungle and come back and everything's going to be fine. It really is a healing journey. It's not a magic bullet.
Yeah, yeah. It's and one thing I'll tell you is the work you can do with Iboga, because you do have so much control of the steering wheel in there, you can cover a lot of things with the right space and the right providers. One of the things we do when people come to our retreat is something called the psycho-spiritual journey. And the way that works is, imagine you're under the influence of the medicine, you're laying on a comfortable mat, we're in the jungle, you have your eye mask on, and I come check on you. And I might say, "Hey, Pascal, how you doing?" And you might be like, "Oh, I'm feeling good." I'm like, "Are you feeling the medicine?" You say, "Yeah." I'll say, "Tell me how your body feels." You might say, "Oh, I feel tingling everywhere." And I'll say, "Well, how's your mind? How are your thoughts?" "Oh, they're racing a little bit, but I feel pretty good." "Are you having visuals?" yeah, yeah, I'm seeing, all these faces, or I saw my grandma, whatever it could possibly be. When the conditions are right, what we do is we work with people called the psychospiritual journey. And the last community call I gave was on this. And the psychospiritual journey is essentially me helping to teach you how to navigate the medicine space, right? It's not just a passive experience. I mean, in Iboga, you can go to your childhood home. You could go relive an experience. And so if it's okay with you, I'd love to share one specific journey a person had that sort of really talks about the depth of the healing and why, this idea of like how much you can get done in one sitting kind of works, this 10 years of therapy. So this gentleman came. I won't say anything about his specific features, but his story was that he was a sex addict, right? And so I'll just preface by saying, a lot of people know about Iboga and Ibogaine for addiction, but what they don't understand is that in the same way that Ibogaine is a specialist at curing substance addiction, Iboga is a specialist in healing a different kind of addiction, which I say is an addiction to suffering. That's really what Iboga is a master at. And so this guy's form of suffering was pornography addiction. And he and his therapist had worked for years. He's done all the inner child stuff, everything you could imagine. And so we're in the ceremony. I'm doing a psychospiritual journey with him. And he has a vision of his childhood home that comes up. And so I say, do you want to go inside and explore that? And he says, yeah. So I say, okay, I want you to go inside. Tell me what you see. And he goes back to when he's 3 years old and has some memories. And what we like to do there is have you, if you can find yourself in the home and you're a kid, what we invite you to do is play, right? So I might say, what's he doing? Oh, he has his Ninja Turtles out. Go play with him. And you literally be in your visionary state playing Ninja Turtles. And the reason is because we have such an emphasis in our society on trauma. We've become hyper focused on it, actually. And you have to remember, when you're in the Bwiti, there's a lot of play in the ceremonies. They don't use the word trauma actually out there. That's really a Western sort of thing that we've brought into the medicine space, and for good reason. But there's a lot more you can do. And so I had him play for a little bit. Once that was kind of done, I said, okay, I want you to go into your home when you were 5 years old. And it was a different house. And we did some stuff there. And now we get to 9 years old. And he goes, oh no. And imagine he's standing in his room, seeing himself in the doorway, peeking out through his door as a 9-year-old. And in the living room are his parents fighting. And what happened was the father had a large pornography collection as well, and the mother found it. And so there was a fight in the home that turned very violent, and it resulted with the mother throwing all the pornography away outside, magazines, VHS, okay? And so after that happens, everyone falls asleep. The little boy sneaks out into the backyard. He opens a trash can. He reaches in, he grabs a magazine, and he runs back inside and hides it under his bed. And him and his therapist, through their tremendous amount of work, were able to identify that this was the start of his addiction, right? This boy had it in the family. He had seen it. There was a lot of stimulus around it. And that was when it all started for him, which makes a lot of sense. And so I'm with you, and I'm on the Iboga too, right? So the Iboga is working through me as an extra pair of eyes and ears. And so I say to him, something sort of pings in me, and I say to him, hey, can you go back in time? Can you rewind that? Which is a very common thing, right? You have the steering wheel, remember? And so he rewinds the scene, and I say, I want you to go back to right before you went outside and tell me when you're there. He says, okay, I'm there. And I says, now I want you to go up until you're in the trash can, and right when you reach into the trash can, before you touch the magazine, I want you to ask the medicine, what is it that you're really looking for in there? Right? You're looking for something. It looks like it's pornography, but who knows? And so he says, to himself, he's laying in the bed, mind you, and he says, medicine, what am I really looking for? And he goes silent, and tears start welling up in his eyes and start streaming down his face. He's gripping his chest, his shirt, and through his tears, he says, love. And what happened was this little boy, who, by the way, was shipped off to boarding school the next year, never got any love growing up. And in fact, there was never attention in the house towards him. The only time there was stimulus and energy in the house was when it had to do with pornography. And so in his own roundabout way, this was his way of trying to get love. And so now let me ask you, and this is what I asked him, how are you going to find love in kinkier and kinkier forms of pornography? He wasn't looking for the porn his whole life. He was just a boy looking for love. And the medicine was able to show him that. And in that moment was his ticket to liberation. I still keep in touch with him. This guy, just so you know, he was so repressed, got a vasectomy at a young age because his understanding of sexuality was so skewed. He
Mm,
has a family now. It got a reversal. He has a family. He has a good job. He has a home, and he is completely healthy and good. And so, although it's not a magic cure, it has an innate ability to find that thing that's really causing you to suffer. And when you can turn that stone over and address it, a lot of the residual things in your life fall away. And you don't have to go and focus on all the trauma anymore. You can actually start using these plants in some of the more ceremonial ways that, in my opinion, they're really intended and that what the indigenous people are inviting us to actually do with them.
that's a beautiful story. It sounds like it's really helpful to help address the root of the issue, right? Which is,
No pun
you know,
intended. Yeah.
no pun intended, of course. But it feels very empowering as well when you have that kind of experience where you're in the driver's seat, like you shared, and you're able to empower yourself with taking the action of actually turning the stone yourself, rather than some other way, which might feel a bit less, participatory, but a bit more like top down heavy, like it's coming from this other source of information. It's all within you, basically.
So this, what you just said, I think to me is the pillar of what we do at Rune Wisdom is our experience in a lot of spaces is the person serving it wants to be a shaman or wants to be the healer, or there's some sort of energy a lot of times that they're the ones who sort of have the answers. And and I watched a power dynamics video from your Nectara platform, which was amazing, by the way. And it's sort of the same thing. It's like these people are coming and they see the person serving the medicine in some sort of role. And what we found is that if we can reduce ourselves not to seeing down at the people and not to having them look up or vice versa, but seeing eye to eye and make our specific work with you about empowering you, that empowerment plus you and the medicine is the recipe for sustained wellness and health. I mean, my coaching platform is called Authentic Empowerment for a reason. And so this is really the key to me as a provider is how do you empower people with the medicine? Do as little as you can, but empower them. That is how you do your job.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that relationship of equality and humble service, I think, are two of the most basic and most important qualities of a provider. Actually, is having that perspective on the work and themselves and the medicine, and it does really open up a healthy relationship in the healing experience for sure. And you're actually writing a book on the psycho spiritual experience, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about that because that's a very interesting topic, and the way you shared around helping people navigate that experience, that navigational skills, I think is something that a lot of people don't talk enough about, actually. So I'm very happy you're putting out some resources for that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, that book will be my third one. My first one was on the science of sound healing. My second one I just released right here. I just have it. It's Living Beyond the Mind. It's a book about soteriology, which is the study of liberation seeking systems. And so I wrote a book basically about the root of suffering being the human mind based off the Buddhist work and sort of coming off that. And yeah, this one is the third book I'm writing. And yeah, it's all about the psychospiritual and psychosomatic journeys I've seen people go on. Thankfully, a lot of people have allowed us to, document some of it as we go. The inspiration came from a guy named Dr. Michael Newton. I don't know if you ever know this man. He wrote two books, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls. But what he did was he took basically the idea of past life regression, but he went to between life soul regression and did it in a case study format. And so I'm sort of modeling that in this book where I'm taking case studies of people who've come to us. We have very extensive screening processes when you come in. And then, we document sort of what happened through your psychospiritual journey. Some people have been kind enough to sort of relive it. And so I'll have sort of their narration in the book. But yeah, that's what it's about. And that book specifically, 100% of the proceeds from that go to our nonprofit. So I'm not taking any of the residual income from that at all to help fund our nonprofit. And so yeah, that book is going to be a real peace of mind. But one thing I'll tell you is I try not to talk too much about the Bwiti in those books, other than the initial reciprocity, the initial reverence, the initial thank you. Because what I've seen is that it becomes very easy to try to speak about a tradition in that. And like I said earlier, there's no words that can describe it. I mean, it's wild, man. You got to go see it one day. I hope you do go see it one day. And if you ever do want to go and anyone wants to go, I have different villages. Some are a little bit more intense, you can find, more traditional. Some are sort of catered towards the Westerner. And so we can help point you in the direction of some safe places if anyone listening also wants to go. My wife actually takes women every year.
Beautiful. Yeah, we'll share the
Yeah.
link in the notes as well if people want to connect, and I'm definitely interested. I would love to have that sort of experience, and everything that the medicine stands for, especially the reconnection to earth and lineage. Those are things that are very important to me, and it's definitely calling. So it's in my future somewhere for sure.
Yeah. And if you guys
Um,
ever want to come to a retreat, there's a spot for you as an offering for us for all you guys have done. So just know that's always there for you too.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. So imagine I'm going to a retreat soon, and let's get into some practical advice here for people who are interested in exploring the medicine, see if it's a fit for them. I'm going to a retreat, in a month or two. How should I prepare for an Iboga experience, like specifically in a jungle environment and a more ceremonial approach?
Yeah, yeah. So there's not too much of a diet to worry about. So you don't have to really dive into that as much. What I would say is because of what it does for the myelination production, is just make sure your diet coming in does have nice cholesterol sources. Eggs or avocados are a good one if you can eat salmon, some of that. So just make sure you have that in. If you can get a plant-based amino acid supplement, that's also a great thing to bring in, but they're not necessary. In terms of another way to prep your body, if you can do some sort of natural liver flush, when you come to our retreat, and in the prep guide, we have a all natural liver flush recipe that's there for you. It's a 4-day process. You have to finish it 72 hours before you arrive because the grapefruit, which is one of the key ingredients, is known to be contraindicated with Iboga. And the reason we do that is because, in terms of prepping for a retreat, like if you were coming, is that your liver is where you process and metabolize the Iboga. And so ibogaine, for example, goes through a process of demethylation and it turns into neribogaine inside of the liver through an enzyme called the CPY2D6 enzyme. And so increasing your liver health helps increase the metabolic efficiency, which then produces these secondary metabolites, which do the majority of effects. So taking care of your liver is a great way. Obviously, stop the alcohol. You can't be on any pharmaceuticals. There are a few you can take for blood pressure and things like that, but anything of the SSRIs, any antidepressants, anything psychotropic, any stimulants, absolutely need to have stopped. I would start weaning off the coffee and caffeine, especially because it's such a big part of people's lives. If you can start to detox yourself or taper yourself, treat that like its own substance. If you can taper yourself before you come to the retreat, you might find an independence from caffeine in your life after that. Then you can bring something in like cacao, which has theobromine, which is actually much more beneficial for you. And so, yeah, the real big ones are making sure your liver health's right. Obviously, the place you're going to should ask you for an EKG. Even though Iboga doesn't have the same cardiotoxicity risk, we still run everything with the same sort of approach as an Ibogaine clinic would. So you have to submit an EKG. They should have it checked by a doctor. And what they're going to be looking for is your QT interval. As long as that's within normal range, you should be good. If you've had a history of alcohol abuse, you should probably get a liver panel done, and that will tell you about that CPY2D6 enzyme. That's a big important one. So if you have a history of abusing alcohol, you're definitely going to want to do that first. And then, yeah, after that, the other thing I would say is just be aware because the second you sign up for the retreat, you're going to start having some pretty unique experiences. I just got an email from a lady today and she was literally telling me about the dream she's been having. And it's unanimous. It happens with everybody. They'll be like, hey, as soon as I said yes to coming, weird stuff started happening. And so just sort of know that that's okay. But yeah, just to recap, the heart, getting that checked out. They should have a doctor and screening protocol like we do. The liver, and then, yeah, getting the healthy fats and the cholesterol foods in your diet to help you really support your brain during the neuroplasticity that's going to happen.
Mhm. And how much time should someone dedicate to the retreat arc, if you want to call it that? Like, I'm preparing before and I'm going back home. Like, how long should I stay at the retreat? How much time should I plan for self care and rest? And of course, every day is like that, but how could people plan their experience?
Yeah, so we have integration coaching built into our package because of this. And so what we really say is 21 days before and 21 days after your retreat experience. And so if you really think about it, it's a total span of about a month, the entire container. And the reason we say the 21 days after is because the neuroplastic window is largest in that peak. And so if you can really come out of that retreat and stick to a really regimented style of meditation or whatever integrative tool you decide to use, right? Like, we work with you guys. Our guests have access to Nectar when they come home. And so whatever you're going to use, if you can do it 21 days after, that's how you build a strong habit. And so what we really do is the 21 days, but we have coaching that goes with people for up to 3 months afterwards. And so our container is about a month before, 3 months after. But what we tell people, if they can't commit to the whole thing, if you can do 21 days before and 21 days after, you're going to have a new life when you come home. It's going to be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's such a big part of the integration phase is landing back home and not getting dissociated back into modern life and all the old habits. Is a real opportunity to work with something of real value and of lasting value as well if you can commit to that period. So I think that's very important because the change is it's not a one-time fix, it's a sustained change.
Yeah, and one thing I think is really important to say, and I always tell people this, and I say it sometimes as a joke, but I mean this. I tell people, outside of your safety, I'm not concerned about what happens in the ceremony for you. Because what Iboga does for you, really, you feel it after you get a full night's sleep. After Iboga, right? It's a stimulant. So you're not going to be awake sleep that night. The whole next day, you're probably going to be awake. And if you're dosed right, that following night, you'll fall asleep. When you wake up in the morning after sleeping, after an Iboga journey, the way you're going to feel, that's when you'll know really what Iboga is because what it's doing to your brain. And so Iboga isn't concerned with the ceremony as much. It will show up for you and you see light shows and who knows, but it's about your life. And you have to commit to living a new life really after Iboga. That's why I said if your home environment isn't safe, do not touch it. But if you want to come to Iboga and you want to change your life and you commit to that, you will have all the support you need from that plant. And then if the place is doing it in ethical ways, they should be supporting you too. Right? One of the things we have is if you can't afford it, we literally have free integration coaching. Like you can work with me as much as you want. If you really can't afford it and you need it, I'll give you a 10-session package. Don't even worry about the price. And so that is the big thing is what it's doing for your life. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That's a beautiful way of framing it. It is about changing your life, and that's what people are looking for. We all want to be joyful and happy and healthy and connected. And I'd like to ask you as a last question, like the importance of community and belonging as part of this medicine, because or the feeling of it when you're in medicine and after it, because from what you shared of the Bwiti ceremonial work, it sounds like the belonging and the connection and the community is such a big part of the healing and the experience itself.
Yeah, it's actually the second or third question on our workbook. If you come to our retreat, we have a pre-retreat workbook and it'll ask you, what does community mean to you? And when you go home, what type of community do you have to hold you? Um, the thing with community is, we move together, not as independent parts, but as one. It's just like a body. It's a collection of cells that come together and it moves as one, right? Your liver's not hanging out downstairs while you go upstairs. You have to move as one. And so without community in our lives, this medicine experience is never going to be what it could be. It's the fruits of your labor are never going to be fully blossomed without the community. And so, yeah, I mean, we have an online community we work with through WhatsApp. As you know, we've talked about it. Our plan is to kind of do what Soltar is doing and create sort of an online community as well to connect people. We have community calls every month. We have integration community calls. And so, yeah, that word has got to keep coming up over and over because, a lot of people, their family dynamics aren't really the place where they find the most nurturing. And, there's a beauty in finding it outside of that. I have a tattoo in my body that says, no pelo sangue. It's a Brazilian saying, and it means not by blood. In other words, the community you pick, the family you pick, right? And so, yeah, we have to come together as one big community. And that's what I love about what you guys have done is you guys have empowered people like us to be able to do that in sort of these new and creative ways. And so, yeah, man, I just a side note want to say freaking thank you for what you're doing. Because yeah, that's everything. I mean, look at the plants around you. They're growing in community.
Yeah,
The
I
plant,
love
yeah,
plants.
yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, I love that you share that from not just a perspective of, your friends or family, but also the community of your own body. Your liver is always with you. And so how are you taking care of that community? For me, the community was always sort of the guiding message from my healing journey. That's why I have a wolf tattoo here. And I got the tattoo when I was kind of transitioning from lone wolf to community wolf. I like to say that the community itself has taught me more than the medicines in a lot of ways. So
I
it's
see.
really reconnected me to the web of life within me and around me. And so, yeah, thanks for standing for that. I think that's a very important part of the journey. And um, we're kind of out of time now. And thank you so much for the conversation and, talking about responsibility, talking about integration, talking about community, talking about reciprocity. Is there anything else you'd like to share as a closing thought?
Yeah, if anyone's interested in working with Iboga, reach out. We do free discovery calls. Even if you don't come work with us, I know some people in Colombia who carry the medicine in a really reverent and beautiful way too, have different ways of holding it. But yeah, just know that there's a lot of really good people out there who are holding this plant. But just make sure you do your homework before you go. Some people can talk really well and they'll tell you things, but if you do your homework yourself, you'll start to see what's going on. And yeah, just make sure you're safe. You do your research and you're not afraid to ask those difficult questions to people. So you make sure you're empowered.
Absolutely. That's a really good advice. Yeah, thank you so much, Troy, and send my regards to Joelle as well. And thank you so much for your work at Root and Wisdom. I hope this was helpful for people listening and that they can find a good way to enter or get curious about the medicine in a responsible way.
I see you, man. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.